So, I'm sure anyone who watched the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix would have realised that the ending of that race was unusual.
Typical decision.
I just don't get it. There's so many better ways this could have gone. Rubbish. It's rubbish.
You only need one racing lap.
They've done all they can to make this as underwhelming as possible.
I don't understand why he's not letting us through.
Michael.
Another huge mess.
So, today I'm asking not only how and why it happened, but also who gained and lost out. It may be more drivers than you think. Also, why some of the stewards' key arguments in this protest may actually be wrong. So, sit still as we go over this controversial season finale. So, what actually happened? Right, where do we start? First of all, what was the actual problem here that makes it so controversial? Well, we can see two extracts from the sporting regulations with Article 48.12 stating that any cars that have been lapped by the leader will be required to pass the cars on the lead lap and the safety car. And also, once the last lapped car has passed the leader, the safety car will return to the pits at the end of the following lap. Now, obviously, this is the normal procedure that's almost always been followed since the rules were introduced. However, during this race, we saw a new way of going about things, only allowing cars 4, Lando Norris, 14, Alonso, 31, Ocon, 16, Leclerc, and 5, Vettel to pass, with those being all of the cars that were between leader, Hamilton, and second place, Verstappen, but not the lapped cars behind Verstappen. Now, this is unheard of, and race director Michael Masi himself said after the 2020 Eiffel Grand Prix that, quote, "There's a requirement in the sporting regulations to waive all lapped cars past." And also, it was position 6 onwards that was still running on the lead lap, so between 10 and 11 cars had to unlap themselves. And therefore, the safety car period was a bit longer than we would have normally expected. Now, there's been no major changes to the safety car rules or procedure since this race, so one would expect the same procedure to have been followed in Abu Dhabi. But alas, it was not. So, what did we see in Abu Dhabi?
Another huge mess.
Well, if we take a look at the track map from lap 57, we see all of the cars going past turn 5 onto the straight. In this situation, we see Norris, Alonso, Ocon, Leclerc and Vettel in between the title rivals. We then get a message from race control stating that those 5 are permitted to overtake, and they do once they get to the end of the straight. Vettel ends up lagging behind as the pack gets drawn out during this process. Once Hamilton begins to slow, we can see the pack has bunched up behind him and we see most of the unlapped cars heading down the start-finish straight to start their penultimate lap. As we head into turn 1 under green flag conditions, we see Verstappen right on Hamilton's tail, and Ricciardo and Stroll, both of which have been lapped between them and third place Sainz. As Sainz was following the lapped cars at the restart, we can see he lost around 3 seconds through the first section of the track and was under pressure from the train behind him. It isn't until set 2 that Carlos was even able to get past the lapped Aston Martin of Stroll. Once we get to the end of the race, we are left with a rather unusual scene, with the 5 cars allowed to unlap still very much racing while most of the grid had finished the race. Unfortunately, for those 5 lapped cars, the decision was so late that there was no chance they would have been able to catch the pack and then fight for higher positions. And even if they had caught, does that mean the still lapped cars of Ricciardo, Stroll and Schumacher would have had to move out of the way and been lapped by the people they were fighting all race? Unfair, right? And that's why Article 48.12 exists, not to give an unfair advantage to only some of the lapped cars that the race director chooses. So, obviously, at this point, we know that Mercedes lodged a protest against the race results. But what was their argument? And what did the FIA think? So, the scene is set. In the red corner, we have Ron Meadows, Andrew Shovlin, and... Is that boss music? Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Harris, QC. Okay, now I appreciate most people won't know this guy, but he is a big deal. He led a successful defence on behalf of Manchester City in their case against UEFA over being banned from the Champions League for breaching financial fair play rules. He also won what has been described as the largest ever UK damages action in the Merrick's v Mastercard case, and is presently leading 2 defences for Daimler. So yeah, he's a big deal. But in the blue corner we have Jonathan Wheatley, Christian Horner and Adrian Newey. Okay, I'm going to stop doing that. But nonetheless, they were all allowed to be present as they were classed as interested parties by the stewards. Mercedes' argument was actually fairly simple. They claimed that there were 2 breaches of the sporting regulations from our good old friend from the start of this video, Article 48.12, where it stated, quote, "Any cars that have been lapped by the leader will be required to pass the cars on the lead lap and the safety car, and that once the last lapped car has passed the leader, the safety car will return to the pits at the end of the following lap." Mercedes argued that had this been complied with, car 44, so Lewis Hamilton, would have very likely won the race. And this is actually potentially backed up by the amount of time Carlos Sainz lost, having to follow just 2 cars. They therefore requested the stewards to amend the classification under Article 11.9.3.h of the FIA International Sporting Code. Now, it sounds confusing, but it basically gives the stewards the authority to amend the classifications from the race. The meeting was adjourned for 40 minutes to allow for Red Bull to respond with defences, although it is debatable whether or not they really had any right to be there as an interested party ahead of any other team, as almost every team was affected by this decision. But they did finally present their case, stating that 1. Any does not mean all in Article 48.12. 2. That Article 48.13 of the sporting regulations states that the message safety car in this lap is the signal that it will enter the pit lane at the end of that lap. 3, leading on from 2, and that therefore Article 48.13 overrides Article 48.12. 4. That Article 15.3 gives the race director overriding authority over the use of the safety car, and now that is absolutely correct. Number 5, that even if all the cars that had been lapped, of which there were 8 in total and 5 were allowed to overtake the safety car, it would not have changed the outcome of the race. Now, I would say straight away that point 1 and 5 are, well, wrong. In the given context, any absolutely does equate to all. And that point 5 is also wrong, as a good 2/3 of the grid were left without the opportunity to improve on their position. But you thought only 2 teams had to provide arguments here. Oh no. The third and final party is the race director himself.
Another huge mess.
Michael Masi. He put forward the argument that the purpose of Article 48.12 was to remove those lapped cars that would interfere in the racing between the leaders, and that in his view Article 48.13 was the one that applied in this case. Now, this is debatable as well, because how do you define leaders? Just first and second? Or does Carlos Sainz in third not count as a leader? Because his battle absolutely was affected by having 2 lapped cars in front of him still. The race director also stated that it had been long agreed by all the teams that where possible it was highly desirable for the race to end in a green condition, so in this case not under safety car. So it was up to the stewards now, and after deliberation they called both of the team bosses back to tell them the results. Firstly, they decided that the protest was in fact admissible, meaning the investigation was necessary. They also decided that Article 15.3 does allow the race director to control the use of the safety car, which in their determination includes its deployment and withdrawal. They also agreed that although Article 48.12 may not have been applied fully, spoiler, it absolutely wasn't, in relation to the safety car returning to the pits at the end of the following lap, Article 48.13 overrides that, and once the message safety car in this lap has been displayed, it is mandatory to withdraw the safety car at the end of that lap. They also stated that, notwithstanding Mercedes' request that the stewards remediate the matter by amending the classification to reflect the positions at the end of the penultimate lap of the race, this is a step that the stewards believe is effectively shortening the race retrospectively and hence not appropriate. Now, this effectively reads to me as, yes, the normal procedure wasn't followed, but the rules basically have a failsafe, giving the race director the power to do as he please, which I'm not entirely sure is a good precedent to set for the sport going forwards. It also makes no mention of only half of the cars being allowed to unlap. It instead focuses on when the safety car should have come in. So ultimately, who won out and who lost here? Well, obviously, the biggest loss was Lewis Hamilton, having lost his record-breaking 8th championship due to the race director's change in approach. And the biggest winner was, of course, Max Verstappen, as he claimed his first ever championship. Then we have the 5 lapped cars who were let go, barring Lando Norris, on the loss list, as they were effectively limited to a P7 finish at absolute best. Now, yes, Lando was also limited, of course, to P7, but the cars were so spread out behind him from having to pass the leaders, he was under no real pressure from the pack behind ensuring his track position, so we can put him on a neutral list. Next up, we have Carlos Sainz, who was probably the hardest hit. He had 2 lapped cars in front of him, thus making an attack on Max or Lewis impossible. And also, he had a train of cars on fresh tyres behind him, piling on the pressure. Now, the 3 cars who were not allowed to unlap themselves, being Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll and Mick Schumacher. All of these immediately onto the lost out list. They were robbed of any chance of a points finish through no fault of their own, and the race director effectively creating a new procedure. Now, Bottas, Gasly and Tsunoda I think should join Lando Norris on the neutral list, as they were pretty much not impacted by the decision of the race director. And an honourable mention as well must go to Sergio Perez, who would have been on the gain list, but unfortunately he had to retire before the race restarted. He would have almost certainly grabbed P2 from Hamilton on those fresh, soft tyres. But I'm sure that's the last we'll hear about this whole sorry affair. Right? This is going to be a long month, isn't it? So, what do you guys think? If you made it this far, it would be amazing if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it really does help out and it's free. I'll be looking at all of the comments and I'm excited to see what you guys think should have been done. For me, I would have red flagged the race with 5 laps to go and have a fair sprint to the end. But that's my opinion. What's yours? See you next time. Goodbye.